Welcome back. This is going to be another episode of the LJL OU podcast. You will notice that it's not Lexi handing over the reins of the hosting today. It's me, because of course Lexi is over on the NLC Div 2 cast today. Yes. So if you have any spare time, of course this won't be relevant to anyone listening towards the future. In that case, you can just congratulate him. But if you have some time, please go watch over there, because Lexi is really cool and we like him a lot. You know who else we really like? We like Melvinizzle, who's joining us here for this podcast. Special guest, obviously, been a big part of our team for the last split and a bit. Melvinizzle, how is it going?
Pretty good, honestly. Last week I was on that Div 2 broadcast, so I'm very glad to get to see Lexi go over to that one. Yeah, exactly. We're doing the gradual LJL takeover, you know. Give it a couple more weeks and we'll start to see the trickle.
Like, this is public. Come on, man, what are you doing? You're giving away the master plan.
There was a great meme that Hina put in our Discord, actually, which is like this puppeteer of LJL like puppeteering the NLC, which is puppeteering the LEC. It's like this giant chain of power going down.
I'm happy at that trickle down effect.
We are actually the Illuminati. We've got like Dan Brown is writing a book about us as I'm speaking.
Crazy. Okay, well, anyway, for those of you who are not aware of our current proceedings, this is episode 3 of season 3 of the LJL unofficial podcast. We've been doing this for over 2 years now, which is a very strange thought, but we cover all things LJL related. We're not affiliated to Riot Games in any of their branches. We're just a load of fans which really enjoy things. So if you do appreciate our content, please give us a like, comment, and subscribe, and everything. But with all that, and all our regular screens the other way,
and like send us DMs saying how great we are. Just like really invest.
Just really big up our egos, because if you can't give us money, give us like some real like big ups to the ego, because that's actually how we sustain ourselves. We're actually like really weird demonic beings that live through like emotional attachment to our viewers.
I am clearly angelic. Have you seen this face?
I have, and that's why I said demonic. Okay, anyway. I did because
friends.
So you can tell I'm not as used to hosting this, because I actually completely skipped over both myself and Sam's introductions, which I normally do. Sam, how are you doing? How are things?
I'm doing really well, mate. Thank you very
much.
Good. I've been doing a lot of writing this week, so that's what I've been doing at the minute. Looking forward to doing some Warhammer 3 content later.
Oh, true. That's going to be a great game.
Switch out from the usual stuff. So yeah, pretty good. Not on NLC this week, so I've got a lot of time to do other stuff, which is great.
Haha, I've been doing like 4 broadcast days a week for a long time, so
woe is you, LEC guest.
Poor thing. No, I have to say, like, it's been a really cool experience. Obviously, like last weekend was one of the greatest in my life. Quickshot is incredible, and I love the guy to bits, and he made my job very, very easy, and I really loved that weekend. But I'm also kind of looking forward to a break after like another week or so, because running myself dry on 3 leagues has been quite crazy. But of course, the first of those leagues which I started on was the LGL. We've had our first 2 games of play. We've had for each team, we've had day 1 and day 2. So we should probably get into that. If we look over the standing, that's probably a best way to go look at things, because with the amount of games that we've played, we're not exactly going to have a time to dive into absolutely everything. I guess Melvinizzle, as you haven't cast any of the games yet, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because actually my first time hearing your thoughts on the first couple of games of play. Any big takeaways from yourself?
Other than I think that there's something magical about Axis managing to do it again. Yes. That's really like the team for me. That I know I'm the big Sengoku
again.
Person,
it's 3 years in a row.
I'm loving what I'm seeing. They are just doing so good. Can you name a more iconic duo than Axis and having killer jungle ADCs that just carry the game? I am absolutely loving what I'm seeing out of this squad so far. And the thing is, you can look at them and then look at the other 2 that are sharing that top spot. But Axis, I would say the fact that they beat Hawks, that I know we're going to go and talk about a bit later on, that is a pretty good strength of schedule. Like, I know that V3, everybody's been pretty down on them, and I think that I'm probably on a similar situation. Mm-hmm. Still very impressive for the first game to kick things off.
So, obviously for audio listeners, Axis went 2-0. They beat the Hawks and they beat V3. So the Hawks were a team that, if you haven't listened to previous episodes, are somewhat of a super team. Blank has come back to the region. We expected him to do well. Quick reminder, though, for those of you who've been for those of you who've been been around a bit longer, you will remember what happened in the start of 2020 in that Sengoku lineup with Blank and Pyrion. I think they went 0-3 in their first 3 games. I think they got a 1-1 in week 2, something like that. They struggled for a while. It took until week 4 for them to really turn on. That was the last Blank team that we saw in the LJL. In the summer, of course, they ended up being a lot stronger. But either way, the Hawks have maybe fallen low of expectations already. And let's just kind of put a bit more structure to this, because we have the standings right there. I'd like to stay on them. Sam, I'm going to throw it to you. This is something which I'm stealing from J-Real, who did a great job hosting for us, debuting with us on the LJLOU, so congrats over to him as well. Mess or impress? I want you to pick one team that's really impressed you and one team that you just think is not. Far away.
So obviously we called out, Axis to were the obvious choice, and we'll talk more about that later. But the other team I really need to touch on is Burning Core. Holy moly, this team have impressed me. 2 very different looks from this team in the 2 different games. I mean, you got a Darius and was Darius Tryndamere solo lanes in the second game, if I recall correctly. And
yes,
in the first game
it was. They flexed the Tryndamere mid, yeah.
Absolutely, they had the game where Ray Farkey got on the Jax, Flawless on the Diana, and you've got this duo of Flawless and Dice who've been brought in as a kind of replacement for their former superstar Korean jungler in Once coming in. They've got this guy Flawless, who was another veteran LCK jungler who was once considered a pretty stellar up-and-coming talent himself. He's alongside Dice, who was his academy mid laner alongside them, and they've been phenomenal.
Also worth noting,
has been great.
Also worth noting that they brought in Fujimoto as a support as well. Now, I'm always going to be sad that Proud retired on the note that he did, because I felt like Proud was one of the best members of that Burning Core legacy. Even though the last year was so bad, the year before that, I mean, Proud was one of the most exciting players to watch in the LGL, especially from that support role. Fujimoto was substitute/academy support for DFM, and he's done really well. I think particularly his Tom Kench game very much impressed me when I saw that. I'm trying to, because Burning Core versus...
He played Tom Kench in both. He played Tom Kench in both. So you're talking about the...
Yes. Oh, yeah.
CGA against, yeah.
Second one, yeah. So that would have been the one which I saw on live, because I couldn't catch all the day one live.
Yes.
But okay, so that's obviously your impressive one, Sam. You got a team that you want to slam on a bit?
Sure. I mean, give me one more second to rave about Flawless, and I'll move on to who didn't impress me. In the sense that Flawless went Diana, then Karthus, and Chef's Kiss. Like, I was, my thinking was before this split that if Burning Core were going to succeed, it would be on the back of their mid jungle being really good, and they've come in and looked superb. Ray Farkey looks back to the form. Yuhi didn't even look that bad. I'm so excited for this team. I could be burnt yet. We'll find out. But the team who didn't impress me as much. I'll call out probably CGA, who I wasn't expecting to be great, but they've not even looked. Yeah, like there's granted it's first week and things haven't clicked yet, but Cassin's definitely not looked as good without Nathan to back up his over-aggression. Nap hasn't been able to play safe in the way we've generally consisted of it. Even Nemo on things like his prize Thresh got a little bit done in versus Sengoku. 064 is not what you want to see.
Happy Melvinizzle noises.
I have to watch Nemo suffer in the process. So it's silver linings.
Yeah, so I've been... Considering I wasn't expecting them to be necessarily great, this was a step below even that, which is disappointing.
Yeah, Melvinizzle, you got any thoughts on CGA as well? Just chiming in on that. I mean, obviously, you've talked about Axis as like the impressed team. If you want to tag him with CGA, and if you got another team that's like you want to dump on a bit, obviously go into that after. But CGA is probably a team we can delve into a little bit more in this case.
So I saw that we were going to do the impressed segment, and I was like, okay, nice. I'm obviously impressed of Axis. But then on the other end, I was really struggling to find out who I actually would call a mess, because talked about the Hawks. I kind of get why they were down here right now. Axis really took them off guard, and then the second game, Rascal Jester, pretty solid fight overall. And Dasher still looked clean. I was fine with that, so I'm not going to say they're a mess. V3, again, low expectations. The biggest part of them that seemed a mess would be the fact that there was a bit of a lack of team synergy, not very much cohesion for a squad that really should be above and beyond for that, as I believe outside of Rascal Jester, the one with the most members that are staying together. Obviously not on the original roster, but nonetheless. So that does just leave CGA, which I decided to not have expectations for coming into this split because
that's a very sensible idea.
Yeah. Like again, yeah.
I didn't make a tier list, but I definitely would not have put them on it and just done 7 teams because this squad last time around, every single time I tried to predict anything with CGA, they just threw it out the window. And losing their most consistent piece in the mid lane, I was like, no, not going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Not until I see it play, at least.
Yeah.
First thing, clip that because that's great. And the second thing is like this feels like it's always been the CGA thing. The last time that they were like, okay, so the first time that they were title contending was when they had Arya, who was actually still going by Luna at that point. That was in 2019 summer.
2019, yes.
And they finished the round robin in first, I believe. I'm trying to remember if they actually finished ahead of DFM. No, they didn't. No, they didn't.
In the bot lane as well. They came second or third, yeah.
They came second, and then they got dumped out in the semifinals by V3 because Yutori and Vivid turned mega online and they just dumped them out. Yeah, and that was like the last time that they were like super title contending. The only other time was
River, the guy's playing with Dignitas now
yes,
as well. That was
on
their
V3.
At the time.
Yes,
throwback to LJL alumni.
Yeah, so 2019. So like, obviously we didn't watch that league as avidly because we weren't broadcasting it at the time. But yes, that was the end of that split was pretty crazy because CJ were looking like, wow, they could maybe topple DFM, and then it's like, nope. That was the last time it was triple round robin as well, so we returned to that now. But then you look towards 2020 summer, which is the other time where I dared to have expectations for this damn team. And they were literally top of the table, 1 week to go with, they were second, just behind V3, with 1 week to go in the regular season. And they got like 0-2 tiebreaker out of second place to not get into the upper bracket. And they freaking lose in like second round or something to DFM. They lose to DFM in the semi-final in the lower brackets. No, summer 2020 playoffs were nuts. Seriously, go back and watch that. It was crazy. I mean, the one sad thing was that Sengoku that they fell apart from the Juggernaut match because
why wouldn't they?
Well, because why wouldn't they? That was we saw the worst of Blank when he doesn't play around solo lanes very well, and he just decides to, I'm going to invade. Oh no, my lanes aren't following me. You can make this into a meme. The Principal Skinner one is like, my lanes don't want to come support me. Perhaps they have a point. No, it's the mid laner who's wrong.
As junglers here, myself and Melvinizzle, we completely agree with that. That's definitely your fault. Fun tangent for the listeners as well. We were talking about that V3 CGA semi-finals from 2019. That was mine and Alex's first ever cast together. Was that we got the recording somewhere of that one from way back when? So there's a little.
We didn't even record.
I don't think
we just sat down on a sofa. That was just us sat down doing it offline.
I thought we did record, and they're just awful.
So game 1 we didn't record, and then games 2, 3, and 4 we did record.
Wow,
so we don't have because the first game
they're not
on
public.
the sofa.
They're elsewhere.
Yeah, they are somewhere on a Google Drive.
That's just for the heart.
Yeah, they are.
And then the finals, I remember doing my very first typical sarcastic zany Nymaera bit when a level 1 went really bad. I'm like, well, that was great, wasn't it?
Yes,
that was some fun times.
I'll say I'm significantly better at the yelling at video games now.
But this is obviously an extended bit on how CGA are like, don't trust them. Just don't trust CGA. It's not worth it. It's not worth your heart. Even with Arya and co, they were still a weighted coin. They were still a weighted coin flip, and they were very fun. But you could never bet on them. Now they've lost the star power, and they're waiting to play late game team fights, but they still can't early lane at all, and I'm really worried about them. So I'm going to quickly, because we spent a bit of time in this segment, and this is good to kind of delve into these teams. A team that we haven't talked about, and I would like to talk about. And yeah, you know what? I probably am going to go a bit harder on them. I'm going to talk about Rascal Jester. I think Rascal Jester, I thought they should have come in as the strongest team in the very first week. They have kept together almost everyone on their roster, and they've had 2 difficult games. Even the win they had was a bit suspect. And of course, they did end up losing 1 game 2 to DFM. Now, DFM turned up and... Okay, they'd probably be my impressed team because they turned up a lot stronger than I thought they would. But I feel like particularly Sol had some very egregious team fighting errors in game 2 on the Jinx. Like he randomly walks into a brush and just like...
He did the Gango thing. My heart got broken by that clip last year. He did exactly the Gango thing.
Are we talking game 1 here or game 2?
That was game 2, I believe, because they still ended up winning in the end. But he just sprints into a brush as Jinx, while excited,
and then
I just couldn't bear it.
Yeah,
and it was
that was
exactly what Gengar did.
It's a Felios. Yeah. So I mean, so if I'm, it's not like a full mess, but Rascal Jester, I pegged them as my my number 1 team in my power ranking, and they looked a bit shaky in the way that they were doing their macro. It wasn't awful, but mainly their team fighting instincts look way off right now. They've been carried a little bit by just having slightly more cohesion than other teams, but
I will contest slightly.
Do it, yeah. Good content.
For one reason, the fact that I actually put DFM as my number 1 team in my power rankings, because I actually had a lot of hope for Yaharong, and they still had 3 of the best ever players in a core that has not changed, when Utapon, Steel, and Ebby. And it turns out they're all quite good at the game still. Steel got to play, like Diana and Poppy, did pretty well on both of them. Ebby got a hold of the Tryndamere, which looks really good for him. The fact he can run towards these kind of Hullbreaker, bruisery kind of stuff, is quite good method for him. I actually thought this game was I half wonder whether DFM would come in and be really, really good again. It turns out they are, because they've still got the pull. The game versus the Hawks, while I agree the one misstep from Sol was pretty egregious, and I will agree with you on that. I actually thought outside of that, Sol and Secret actually laned really well in that game, considering that the mid lane fell apart after the early 2v2 in the river went very much in Hawk's favor, and Dasher ended up forcing recap back 3 times and puts him 0-3 in lane because of some stuff.
I'm going to follow on to that and say that Secret had a killer set game in this one. They had a massive flank. I think it was like the 3rd or 4th dragon fight, something along those lines.
Phenomenal.
Where they were lurking for a good 30 seconds or so. And that's kind of the thing about set support. There's a reason that realistically, globally, only Life plays it. And that's because you need to be so present in the mid game. You cannot let the tempo stop. Otherwise, you just get relatively outscaled by all the other utility supports. And I think that Secret did have an amazing game in that one in particular. And overall, just to stay on that Rascal Jester Hawks game, I think that this was an amazing draft gap for Rascal Jester for my money.
Cool. Yeah.
And I would say that because of the format we've got of triple round robin with at least 1 day in between each game day, I think over the split, for my money, Rascal Jester will actually get a lot better because it's going to be very conceptual. If you can think of a good draft that could beat an opposition and it's just slightly in tune with the current patch, then I think those are the teams we're going to see start to succeed as the weeks go on in the fact that it is a triple round robin.
Yeah. So this is the last, we'll move on to standing and go on to a deep dive on a couple of games after this point. But is there any last thing you want to kind of touch in on the standings before we kind of go a bit deeper into 1 or 2 games?
Sengoku Pepe hands.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about the Hawks in a minute. But like, I actually think that while the Hawks' first game was not great, I actually think this game against Rascal Jester was more what we expected. So it's partly why I'm not quite as hard on Rascal Jester, though I understand some of the issues you're calling out.
Oh, it's just, I think it's me having high standards.
Yeah,
high standards.
That's completely rare. That's completely fair. But I would also say that potentially come the end of the split, I'm expecting DFM and Hawks to be top 3, easy. So to have kind of gone 1-1 against those teams early on, I don't think is unexpected.
Okay, so that's a really good segue because we have a game about the Hawks, which I really want to dive into a bit more. Now, I could have picked any other game, but this is for content. And let's be honest, we don't give a fuck about what people want to actually hear about. What they actually want to talk about is actually what the hell is a Smite Poppy top doing in a region.
Glorious.
So 15 marks. Discuss.
Okay.
So context before Melvinizzle jumps in. To explain, Yellow Yoshi is a famous Japanese streamer who's been brought in. It's partly why we had some slightly lower expectations of
Axis top
coming
laner,
in.
yes.
Because Yellow Yoshi, Axis top laner, the guy you can see at for the listeners out there, is the top laner who's coming for Axis. And he is famous for being an insanely good Poppy player. They let his Poppy go through, and it wasn't just any Poppy. It was Smite top Poppy, who basically spent the time playing support Poppy and was unreally obnoxious in this game.
And it wasn't only that they let the Poppy through, but just to jump back to the draft for this game, they actually let it get through to 2nd rotation picks, and then pick an Akali into it after already having Jarvan in the jungle. That alone is already enough to shut down the game if you're really good at the Poppy, which funnily enough, they were. The fact that then they opted to go for this Smite Ronin lane makes so much sense, because Poppy as a champion has a lot of lanes that they just don't want to be in, especially ones like Akali where they can just jump into the Shroud every time they opt for a trade. Okay, well, I guess that I just can't do anything on the Poppy. I can't be proactive. So the fact that Poppy works on low resources, so the Smite roaming strategy works, in team fights completely mitigated any attempt from Konatsu to play the game. 20 minutes onwards, this Akali basically had 0 damage in every team fight because it was Ignite Teleport, they couldn't flash past the Poppy's Steadfast Presence, and every single fight, they found the Akali, they got the root, they knocked them away with the ult, and they just won 4.5 versus 4 fights from Axis. That's all they had to do, and it was really consistent for a pretty much full rookie team.
And, like, let's be real. This is a Poppy's Steadfast Presence is just as good whether she is a support or a full farming member of your team. Poppy's Charge, the Heroic Charge, is just as good whether you are farming or not. Poppy's Keeper's Verdict, just as good whether you are farming or not. The only things that really change there are things like cooldowns, but the actual utility of those spells is just as good as they are. And when you actually want to be roaming around to A, make sure that Akali doesn't get to murder you in lane, and B, then be really obnoxious making Blank's life hell on the Jarvan, it's great, and you can follow up with the other divers in your team. I loved it. You got to go Locket and Redemption to boot.
Thing is, not all positivity.
No.
Axis really didn't get anything done with the pick in the early game, which is the one part where I'm a bit hesitant, where conceptually could have gone quite wrong. But overall, they ended up playing it pretty well, and it ended up working after the 20-minute mark. The thing is, when you play these Smite top strategies, you kind of put yourself on a timer and say, okay, in the early game, we need to be proactive because we want to be putting as many resources into our bottom lane. They had the Jinx, made a lot of sense. Berlin Internet, Nymaera's disappeared.
Yeah, he's been Berlin Interneted. Give him a second. He'll return when he can. We'll keep chatting while he's doing that.
Rambling.
So we can chat about this game and see whether Al wants to add in a little bit more. But we'll start with this game. And like at this point, I also want to call out that 2 of the new members here as well, Swamp and Sangchu, the other names we know very little about, had fantastic games. Swamp on that Jin's out was really, really good. Sangchu went 607. Megamine as well, this guy who had his moments, but was pretty inconsistent, I think it's fair to say. Matched up pretty well into Dasher, who is arguably up there as one of our
region is what the expectation.
One of our best. Right? Yeah, exactly. Up there is potentially the best mid laner in the region. He really is that good. He's been very good for a long time. Very versatile player. And Megamin on the Vex, you worked really well. It was a good team identity as well, as we said. Like a lot of divers to back up this Jinx, who's going to be so safe because there's so many people who can play frontline in front of her with all the various bits of CC and what they've got. And they really stepped up and delivered. In fact, Sangchu's other game we're not going to talk about, where he got the Zeri and ran rampant on it. Showed that actually this Axis team is another one of those ones where like somehow, some way, they've managed to pull together a roster out of nowhere that looks, at least off week 1, pretty damn competitive.
And I'm going to put a bit of a wild take out there and say, if they can keep this tempo up for at least 2 more weeks, these rookies will have enough confidence that they're going to play pretty much like veterans throughout the split. It's triple round robin, it's going to be very long, and just from what they've shown at the start, Axis is another one of those ones I'm putting up there with the Rascal Jester DFM for really high concept gaming teams so far. Obviously, we've seen 2 games, it's all rookies with the exception of Megamin, so, this is all pinch of salt on it. But overall, super impressive performance to start off the split, and does make me think maybe we're going to see an actual run back of that summer 2021 Axis Miracle Run.
You gotta hope, and I think I love that concept you called out. He's back!
Oh.
Discord has absolutely just, its guts are on the floor, it has evacuated its bowels, it is in an awful state. If you could change your audio through to the video thing.
I see, we're going to change it because Discord is going for you.
Help me a bit, because currently I'm seeing great body language and lots of nodding.
I'll go mute myself on Discord.
I can assume that you're talking about LJL things. All right. It's very intriguing. Can't hear any of it.
Consider this a minor technical intermission.
Am I audible as well?
You are Melvinizzle. Now, this is throwing a curveball to Ebrom, because our lovely producer in the background wasn't capturing any of the audio from this. I have no idea if he's currently doing that. So this is completely derailing everything.
We'll find out. Can you hear us in chat? Discord, can you hear it? Not Discord, Twitch, can you hear us?
At some point. So
find out. Can you hear us?
we will hope that this is.
You can't. Thank you,
working.
Chimo in chat. You can hear us.
Good. Okay. Well, in that case,
is the best. We love
if you
him
could give me
dearly.
quick footnotes of what's happened in like the last 2 minutes,
just gushing about
helpful.
So to fill you in as your play-by-play and brother, what we've basically said is that Axis are in fact the next coming of Exodia,
like
and we should all worship the ground they're walking on. No, what we've actually basically said is like, actually, this is a team of rookies, including Swamp and Sanctu, kind of come in and really stepped up in their first 2 games. Sanctu 6-0-7 on that first Jinx, went wild on the Zeri 9-1 and 6. Great stuff from him. And it's also been some good, as Melvinizzle put it, high concept drafts where they've actually run some like unusual drafts, but that make a lot of cohesive sense in terms of how they want to play.
And I think God, I feel like I reuse this point all the time. But there are 2 sides to this. One is I definitely prefer cohesion over star power as long as like it's within a reasonable margin. Like 90% of the time, ever since like, I don't know, maybe like season 9 was the last. No, even season 9 was like where things really started to. Hell, it's been like this for a while, actually. Let's be honest. There are very few teams where you can play a diff that hard that you end up just like winning de facto. Most of the time outside of that, understanding the way that you play your team composition is just much better. This is also one of my ways that I kind of rationalize one-trick ponies a lot of times, or mains or blah, 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 because you understand how you're playing better than the enemy understands how you're going to play. So, and of course, like this needs to be a little bit more than just one champion niche, because at that point, your draft is very liable at that point, and you can't suffer by like taking all of your other champions out. But this is why actually something like LS, even if he's not actually got the correct take on the meta all the time, and there are flaws with it, because he's actually put the effort into to learn another facet of the meta, which you just haven't, you can't play against it. He's playing a very different style of game. So for a team like Axis, who knew that they were going to be failing in individual margins a lot of the time, I love the way they've come to this split. Is it going to last until week 4-5? Almost certainly not. But this could be the kind of early week rush that could get them into a very powerful spot. Now, this has hamstrung them before. I'm thinking back to Spring 21, where they started with the best start that the org has ever had, which because for context, before 2020, Axis in the triple round robin had always finished 3-18. They'd only got 3. Bad. They were always last place. Truly bad or truly bad results. I mean, I'd say not bad org, because that's whatever. That's too many connotations. But they just hadn't had any success. But for this team to start like 3-0 or something was crazy for them.
Huge.
But then it fell off, and they didn't get into playoffs, and they were a last place team, and it sucked. It really took until last year for us to see Axis be a contending team. I'm just really hoping that this is going to be more of a last year summer rather than last year spring, because if they don't get enough wins to see them through to playoffs with this amount of games, it's going to be rough. So keep up the early momentum. This is going to be quite important for them to get a winning margin against teams like CJ that are also struggling, that might turn on later in the split, and a number of other teams.
My eyes are on Yellow Yoshi personally, because he's thrown a really cool, obviously he got his one trick with the Smite in a meta which kind of supports Poppy's actually quite good. Smite top is pretty viable. That's a kind of like good combination. And he had an interesting kind of Urgot counter pick. I need to see what else he's got in the tank, considering what we know with this player. So give me 3 more weeks. 2 more weeks, and let me see 2 more weeks, considering how many games are playing of this guy. Yeah, I feel a lot happier.
Yeah, as long as it fits into their playstyle, particularly if it allows them to play the same style of game as well. So this is, it feels like Yelioshi is doing a bit of a Ebby at Worlds kind of thing, where he's found his niche champions, and he's like, this is it. This is what I'm playing. This is what the team's playing around.
This is what they need me to play, yeah.
And in fairness, I mean, you look at Ebby at Worlds, and yes, it did constrain their drafts a fair bit. He did damn well on them. So actually, he made the niche pool work because the team knew how to work around it. So yeah, Axis, I have been quite impressed by them. I think that particularly Megamin stepped up more than I thought this player would, because I thought that for the longest time he was propped up by Renekton and Lee Sin mid, playing Iron Spike Wick champions, which meant you didn't actually have to worry about lane control at all, and he's done a lot better than that. So actually, credit to Megamin. I'll take the L on that one and say, actually, yeah, they've done pretty well on that front. Do we want to talk about anything from the Hawks side of it and how they responded to this draft, or has that already been covered?
The draft's kind of been.
I think because we've got the time here briefly. Yeah, like they got outdrafted. I think it's fair to say, even though they did get a failure score. Key J4 was considered pretty high priority.
And it's also J4 into
hanging around the meta.
Jin Poppy.
Yeah, it wasn't a great look, and it was also one of those moments when, oh dear, this team's going to take a while to connect. Fortunately enough, it worked out all right. As I appeared with frozen.
You're good. You're fine.
Great.
You're
We're back.
You are
moving
live.
That's good to know. Okay. Oh, that's lovely. We take that. But I actually think that, like, while that was a bad first game, the second game, even though they lost against Rascal Jesters, looks a lot more cohesive. They were actually proactive in the early game, which is what we were really lamenting in their first game. And they played some decent team fights as well. Dash had a really solid Oriana game. Marble made some major outplays on the playoffs, and like, I have hope for this team yet, even if they are 0-2. The second game was a significant.
Okay. So, I think we've kind of talked about this game a fair amount at this point. I think we've done a lot of groundwork on that. So, at that point, let's dump these two teams and talk about two of our... Oh, Sam's actually just died, hasn't he? He's just disconnected. That's failing internet.
Because, I get to go with each of the hosts.
I'm on one... There we go. Cool. Right. So, I mean, Sam's on the same Wi-Fi box that I am. So, I mean, it's going to happen at some point. God damn. I am... Cool.
Literally turn out all the lights, you know, it went completely dark. It's just how it is, you know. The enemies had figured out where I was streaming.
Actually, really fun. Bit of an aside, but so I have a couple of Filipino friends who really liked Zeri's like character intros and stuff like that, because in the Philippines they have like rolling blackouts all the time. So in terms of just like, oh, not again, power goes out and comes back on, it's just like, yeah, that's just the Philippines. It's just a thing. That was just a quick aside. Anyway, yeah.
Well, you know,
character design, part of it. Okay, cool. Going on to the next match, which I really want to dive deep into, because it was actually this is largely in regards to Zeri as well. Thinking about it, so I didn't plan that at all.
Inadvertent transition.
Nation Focus Me versus Sengoku is the game which I want to dive into, because this was inadvertent transition. That's the one, because Sengoku are almost certainly going to be one of our top teams, I think, at this point. I think that they have a lot of those core pieces. They've shown some good play. What I love about this game is DFM's team fighting instincts actually looked really on point. It wasn't the cleanest game, but if you want to see a game where a team allows a team to get Zeri and then deals with the Zeri, this is really cool to see. There were several points in this game where they would pop the Zeri ult by kind of flirting with the fight, drop the Victor combo on them. They have to back off until their stacks fall off of overcharge. They don't get any of that move speed, and then they can't fight afterwards. They re-engage with the Camille. I was very impressed by DFM in this game, but I don't know what your takes on it are. So do you think there's anything else from this game you thought was interesting, or that we should highlight?
I want to attack the how DFM handled Zeri angle from the draft, because it was pretty damn cool how they went about it. Obviously, Zeri first picked by Sengoku. They were on the blue side. It's one of those super high prio champions. DFM answered with the Karma Poppy, and that Poppy really did a lot in this game because it bought so much space, and admittedly, Sengoku did the cardinal sin of running it down and picking non-stop dashes into a Poppy with the Lee Sin, the Graves, and for me, most importantly, the Yuumi, who is notoriously not able to play against Poppy, because if you get them on top of the target, then you can't jump off of them and you're just dead. That means it's basically like a mini Mordekaiser ult, where just for those couple seconds, you have got NT trapped on this Yuumi pick. So between that, the Camille does a very similar thing with keeping the Zeri locked down. Like you said there, the Victor and the Varus respectively poking down the Zeri and just completely chunking them out before the fights, not letting them keep up those overcharge stacks. I think that DFM knew they were going to play against the Zeri, and they were ready for it.
Oh, his first pick. I think the Zeri was ended up being first pick. And there was, I have to say, Sengoku were halfway to a really, really good draft. And I'll tell you why when I actually figure out which one of these was the pick and ban order. So I'm actually making sure that I'm not talking mad shit, which I sometimes do. So it's the first pick Zeri.
Yeah.
So no, I have it now. So it was the first pick Zeri, and the response was Poppy Karma. Now, at that point, you pretty much know that bot lane is going to be like heavy pressure because we don't see that much solo lane Karma anymore. So you know it's going to be Karma Ezreal, Karma Varus, Karma Senna, something which is just really oppressive long range level 1, level 2 spiking. So you see that Poppy and you're like, oh my god, it's going to be another Smite Poppy top. Do not do that, please. Thank you. So then they lock in the Lee Sin Graves. And I like the Graves if you know that it's going to be a Poppy top. They don't actually know this at this point. They assume and they get punished for it. But whereas we saw the Akali in that first game being locked in, kind of just say, we know it's top lane. Akali has 0 tower taking potential. She is like one of the, probably the worst top laner. Is there a worse top laner at taking towers? She feels like the worst top laner at taking towers. You have no wave clear.
At least early. We've got AP and stuff.
Really
yeah,
bad,
sure.
Especially very early on. I said Akali.
Akali,
I did say Akali.
maybe?
No, Akali. No.
Sorry, it's a Karma.
Akali is the worst top laner at taking towers. Which means that if you lock that in early, Poppy top just like roams out of the lane. Ooh, that's a good point. But she's at least ranged.
Boo.
So Akali is really bad at pushing towers. So if you pick the Poppy and the Smite roaming into that, you avoid a bad lane, whereas Akali can actually solo kill you, because Poppy is not good in lane versus that champion, even with the W. And you can just roam away from it and snowball the rest of the map. You don't really lose anything for it. So if you put the Graves in, hyper push, you can build Hullbreaker first. You don't get to play the Smite Poppy top. So like, sweet, good job, good draft. We've denied the Smite Poppy top. And you're like, wait, what happens if they just flex the Poppy jungle because you just locked in Lee Sin as well? So they kind of fell on their own sword after briefly having a moment of, woo, this is great. Especially because then they gave up hyper pressure bot, losing jungle matchup, and then they had like a okay matchup in top. They achieved almost nothing with it, but I appreciate the first instinct from Sengoku. It's kind of like they're on like step 1 or 2, step 2 out of how to deal with random Smite tops, but they hadn't found out. I mean, DFM so far ahead of them. I don't know if you have any takes on that.
If you can hear me, because I'm aware my picture's frozen again, so I'm hoping I'm audible. Oh, wonderful. I think the thing I think I agree with you there. I also feel that considering DFM were basically saying, actually, we've got flexes here, plus we feel like we've got answers into Zeri, because I think there's probably, you've had this conversation with me and on air and various other places, like there are 2 kind of ways to make Zeri's life. One is smash her in lane so she's behind the curve, and she just doesn't do that much damage at that point from behind. She kind of hits very middling. And when you basically run poke Varus, who is already
I have to say, I would have preferred Senna. I think Senna is much better. Senna was the, especially because it's 12-2. We'll get on to 12-3 later because we'll have a bit of a chat about this because these are all 12-2. But Senna Karma early on is really good into Zeri and is easier in late game because your Varus ult isn't going to miss every time because she's so fast and has a dash and a cleanse.
Maybe I agree, but I think Varus has a bit more pressure in lane from further. I also think that Chains of Corruption is I think also
that's true.
Yeah, he's corruption. Like the guy is a homing laser with that champion, and he gets to go. Lethality is kind of one of the only AD threats in the team fight. Like, yes, there's the Camille, but you've got to be aware of like the Victor and the Karma. Like not people aren't going to be just stacking armor necessarily, aside for the fact that Jet did that because he's tank rise. But actually, you can out life quite difficult. All of that kind of jazz. And so you kind of okay, we've got lane shove in bot lane, plus every single champion can either help us run away or lock you down. Between Victor and Poppy and Camille, who can press R, and the Chains of Corruption from Varus, and the fact you can poke her from miles away, Zeri is outranged and gets locked down when she tries to play her Zeri thing. So she doesn't get to have a very easy game. And bluntly, DFM outrange or outzone control the entire comp here from Sengoku, which is pretty rough.
Yeah, Melvinizzle, and that got really difficult. Any other wisdom to share on this particular draft or the way it played out?
As for the way it played out, it was a bit scrappier than I would have liked from DFM's side. I think that overall they definitely had the comp that could have just sat back and waited, but they took a couple more fights than were necessary. But at the end of the day, it's early split. It's a team that should be confident that they're going to be heading up for those top 2 kind of spots by the end of it. So I don't mind them going for a bit more limit testing, especially getting Yahorong properly implemented into the team, and even Harp in the bottom lane, just trying to make sure that they push that advantage, keeping this Zeri down, trading summoners a lot. Very good.
They did the hard trade level 1 thing this game as well, actually. Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I would have actually said this was the lesser of the two games about the limit testing. I thought game 1 was hella scrappy when they played against
for
Jester.
sure.
Yeah,
I think this game, because remember, it was like, I think, because like Sengoku got their second kill when DFM were pushing the Nexus.
Yeah, because that's kind of what I was talking about. Like, I somewhat agree with you, Callum.
It didn't show in the kills, but I
would say it's in the later stages of this game, because I actually thought DFM played this game significantly cleaner than the first one. No, the first game was still pretty good. It was just scrappier. This game looked really, really clean until Ebby kind of like went to zone people off by holding the hook shot and then got locked down and couldn't get out and then got blown up and then they retreated and then had to kind of outplay around the Elder Dragon in a scenario. And they did so because they're still a good team. But the mistake was like, we really shouldn't have inted in that in the base because we nearly gave up Elder Dragon versus this team that could have made our lives absolute hell. And we're lucky.
What I will say, there were a couple of really interesting fights that I loved how DFM played them. I think it was around, I think it was after a dragon fight, and it was kind of like DFM back off, head back over towards Baron. They go forward, they pick off the Graves first, and they fight front to back. Zeri pops ult. They put the gravity field to zone her off just a little bit. They back off. Zeri's ult falls off. Camille goes back into the Raptor pit and pounces over the wall when Sengoku are like, well, we either have to push mid or we have to go towards Baron. They clear out a ward, and then they get Hextech Ultimatum onto the Zeri, and Zeri's like, wait, I don't have ult. I can't even run fast in this little octagon of doom, and gets absolutely MMA'd to death by everyone on the side of DFM. I do really like how they played out philosophically the fights against Zeri. It felt like it almost didn't matter what champs they had as long as they had like an ability to. I mean, the Victor could have been played with any other engage, but if you have the Victor just be like, plop, get out of here, Zeri, reset the fight and go back in. It felt like that was a really good answer to it, and that's the kind of game where I'm like, hey, maybe this is just a playstyle way of beating Zeri rather than having to draft in a certain way. I do think Zeri is incredibly strong. Also feels like Zeri is one of these champions where unless she's in a good scenario, if she's in a good scenario, she ruins the entire game. You can't play against her. If she's not in the best scenario, actually quite struggles because her breakpoints are not easy to judge. It's a lot of damage calculations, which people haven't really managed to get to yet. I don't think we've seen the limits of the champion, but
yeah, I think that's probably going to be like R5. Like, she's going to be a Samira S champion, where if you look at an enemy team and go, oh, they have no point-and-click CC, they lack zone control.
Exactly that.
She'll just 1v5 the game. Like, that's exactly where she is going to live for me after the next patch, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'll throw this one out there. Like, I can still see an early rotation Zeri if you're saying, look, I want to force you into answering this champion because that's the deal. You have to answer in draft to the Zeri or she gets a free reign and she's a nightmare. But you can answer in draft. But the thing is, if you do that, you say, okay, I know what you have to go to counter Zeri, but we're going to draft these other things around it to make the fact that you've drafted the Zeri like a nightmare. Because now we can play these other champions that make what you've done even more difficult. Because you can kind of like next level, which is a potential option as well. Because if you're saying, look, I'm putting this down to say you have to answer Zeri, but you know that's going to punish you, or we can punish you elsewhere in draft. That's definitely an option as well.
I think with that, I mean, I did think that Paz had a really good game thinking about it. Just bring it back to, I think bring it back to the nameplates. Almost everyone on DFM had a great game. Yaharong's Victor was actually pretty scary as well. Played it well in team fights. Ebby's Camille. We don't see Ebby's Camille a lot, actually, even when it has been very high priority. It's not been his most favorite. He'd prefer to play the Gnar or the Renekton or something. Actually, thinking about the last time Camille was super meta in 2021 as well, he was mainly the Renekton side of that matchup, and he'd just win the matchup. He'd allow other people to ego pick the Camille into it, and he'd be like, lol.
And destroy it.
And he'd play like stuff like Gnar and win the matchup. It was like, cool. So what? Unless you're Kanatsu. Kanatsu was like the real player. Like,
I think the fact he can build a Hullbreaker and play it a bit more bruisery probably appeals to him.
Actually. That's another thing. I was wondering about where I was going to go with this because I remember thinking about Hullbreaker later on. Okay, let's go on to this other topic. Let's go on to this other topic because I'm going to use this as a segue because there was a really good point in this game where the Graves. So Paz builds Hullbreaker and he's like, right, 1v1 me, Ebby, and he just pushes towers. Just push towers all game. And the LJL has loved Hullbreaker first. Now we've seen it a little bit in a couple of ERLs.
LCK's done it now.
LCK's done it quite a lot. LPL is doing it sparingly. But the Hullbreaker is like coming out to play. It's really, really good. Because if you're not a high damage champion with good wave clear in top lane, a cannon wave turns up and like you don't really get to play the game and stuff. So yeah, that gets a little crazy. But what we saw in this game was when it got to late game, when the like DFM had taken Baron and Sengoku were like, right, let's go do weird stuff and just try and contest the push and stuff like that. Ebby had the Hullbreaker, stood alone with the cannon, buffed up the cannon with the Baron buff on it, and suddenly Sengoku were like, wait, we can't kill the cannon, we can't push. It was like Banner of Command. It's like mini Banner of Command. So let's go on to the larger topic of Hullbreaker in the LJL, because it turned up on both top laners in this game. Yeah, Initialise, let's start with you. I want to put you on the spot, Sam.
Sure.
How are you feeling about Tryndamere Nation with Hullbreaker and everything else building Hullbreaker, because going against Hullbreaker without a Hullbreaker feels really painful?
So I think there's there are two things here. One, Hullbreaker is very strong, and two, the LJL's top laners, historically at least, haven't been the cleanest split pushers outside of maybe the top 2 or 3 players in the role. Ebby's been a good split pusher. And then Cog and Ray Falky have had their moments as well. And maybe you can shout at me, because the other ones have been either newer or just not their style at all. And it really showed in the way teams played 1-4, because you kind of had to play Nara or Renekton, because none of the other champions they knew how to split push on. So
and no one really could play Fiora or Aurelia top lane, apparently. So
we didn't have those.
We had Dasher briefly that played Aurelia in spring 2020, and then that team sucked so bad he moved back to mid lane.
And the thing with
and it was a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing with Hullbreaker is it actually makes split pushing a lot more
good,
or rather overextending a little bit as a split pusher.
Yes, probably the best.
You can make it it's a little bit more forgiving, because people gang up on you. Your additional stats that come from having people gang up on you give you a lot more room to outplay than you did before. And I think that's really, really helped. And also, when we are seeing, particularly in the LJL, people really favoring the Tryndamere, it's a way of kind of, at least for the first couple items, stalling the Tryndamere or the Camille or some of the other champions, because it basically says, okay, until you're at 3 items, I can at least clear waves and match you without getting run over in the sideline and getting outscaled. I think that's probably most prevalent for me. In this game, actually, in that game we took at the Sengoku DFM one, where
I would have said it would be the V3.
Sorry,
no, it would have been the Rascal Justice Hawks game.
Sorry, that's the one I'm talking about. Thank you. Yeah,
it was Graves versus Tryndamere, both building Hullbreaker. Yeah, I know on Tryndamere eventually running Graves down.
That's exactly it. Thank you for recovering, because of course that was replacement top laner for Rascal Justice beating the old top laner, right? I know Kinatsu, and it hit this point where I've got Hullbreaker and Immortal Shield Bow, and I can match the Tryndamere until he gets another item, and suddenly I know you can't touch him. But it also allows for a kind of, you get to play into mid game without the Tryndamere getting out of hand, which I think is potentially pretty powerful. If you can get the dragon stacking happening in your favor, or the other 4 get to, like your Aphelios and Orianna in that case in that game, get to scale up without having this death sentence being a lot more immediate. And I think there's some power in that as well, but it is only a stalling option.
I think that, for me, I have a pet theory of why this has started happening, and it all comes back to Janna top lane. So, I wish I had the actual printed off pictures. I could have had them on the wall.
The dominoes, they just keep.
Have you got like a map with like cork boards and straight all over where Hullbreakers come from?
Next
started here.
So I think that's because Janna top lane, right? She goes up there, and then she doesn't go up there. She leaves. That's it. So top laners were thinking, damn, I'm playing my Tahm Kenches, my Malphites, these kind of tanks, all this kind of stuff. I really need to be able to kill this tower. First time Hullbreaker. Okay, people do that. Then it's not against Janna, or the Janna comes back and defends the tower and she can't do anything. So these players are like, actually, Hullbreaker worked pretty well. Maybe I'll try against a real top laner who shows up. They
Imagine
build
if
it.
I had a real item.
Something like a Darius, let's say. Somebody's meant to smack him in lane. You buy the Hullbreaker, you can't lose tower because you just exist. It's like, well, damn, this is actually kind of broken.
I'm fairly sure that Ray Falky built first item Hullbreaker on the Darius too.
There you go. And that's the next evolution of it, though. Then the Darius is like, all right, if this person can build Hullbreaker and not lane against me, if I build Hullbreaker, they have to lane against me. And that's the 5 how it works.
Exactly.
That's how the Hullbreaker has spread across the entire region, and it won't stop.
This is why we have you here. This is why we have you here. You have such a gigantic brain.
We knew that. Look at that. That's beautiful.
We knew that he had like a mastery of all things wall related. You look at that background. You tell me he doesn't have any like. But he's actually just like on the other side of that. It is actually just a cork board with all of these mad theories. That's it.
You imagine the Kool-Aid guy coming through the wall. It's just Tryndamere with Hullbreaker going, oh yeah, striking down your structures.
That's perfect. That's so good.
And there is something to, and especially considering a lot of these top laners do want to play aggro early on a lane. Draw up junglers like nobody's business. Oh, yeah. You draw up mid laners and support roams like nobody's business. Hullbreaker gives you even more room to outplay.
I will also say, following on from something which Kazi said it would have been one of the weeks when Nemo just pops off on Thresh. It might have been it might have been the CGA. It was CGA Axis quarterfinals last whenever it was, where they allow Nemo to have Thresh and he just like bodies them because they dive into him. He's like, look. It's easier to play like full engage composition. Oh no, or rather like in the LJL, because you're working with so many multi-language teams, every team is a multi-language team unless you are DFM where everyone speaks good enough Japanese anyway. Or in this case, V3 because they're all Japanese players. Your communication gets a little bit, so your engages also get a little bit crazy, right? So you can't allow teams to have champions which play entirely into punishing scuffed engages like a Thresh and stuff like that because the communication isn't at the level of certain other regions. Now, I think that applies to Hullbreaker too. I think you can shut down split pushes pretty well in this current meta. There are plenty of picks which allow you to do it, but you need to have the right rotations, the right way to kind of pull it off, right? You need to really put them to the sword. In the LJL, because the communication isn't always there, I wonder if that's another side factor of why this has come in too, because the rotations aren't quite clean enough. They're not quite there in time, which allows the individual with the agency, which is the person who's built the bloody Hullbreaker, to pop off a bit more and work around the edges of that. Anyway, it's just been really easy, really fun, like easy content. Just be like, wow, Smite Poppy top and Hullbreaker Tryndamere and stuff like this. But it's actually quite an interesting in-depth topic. And particularly for our more veteran players like Ebby and Paz and a couple of others, this is starting to be a quite scary return to form from them too.
Oh, yeah. Plus, like, honestly, you empower someone like Ray Farkey with a Hullbreaker meta. You empower someone like Ebby with a Hullbreaker meta. Like, that is going to be dangerous. And you kind of saw it, actually, for DFM's first game in particular. It's like, okay, here's a Tryndamere for this guy. Let's go. And like, you run over it from there. Like that is a pretty good space to be in, especially considering I think Melvinizzle hit it on the head that we have had like it does feel like a kind of response to the Smite meta in the sense that much like a lot of other champions and items, Hullbreaker's been buffed pretty regularly since it's been released. I feel like it's received a lot of buffs, and I think people have now finally been tuned over to the point where people have gone, oh yeah, this item's actually quite good.
Okay, so in the background right then, I was quickly running the numbers because I saw that as a base item, it's already gold efficient because it's 2,800 gold. And I think this might be similar to what happened when Everfrost got buffed in the mid lane and knocked down to 2,800. All the majors started doing it. Hullbreaker has always been this price in recent time, at least. And without
it reminds me of Ardent Sensor, actually.
You're efficient.
It reminds me of Ardent Sensor.
With it, I'm just going to double check this right now as I press enter on the keyboard. It's something like 1.5 times gold efficient when you actually have the boarding party passive active, and that's not including the bonus to the minion that you're buffing. So it's just raw stats.
The actual minion,
exactly. And like, yeah, I mean, like honestly as well, like I've just pulled up the patch notes as well. Like it got added in 11.13. It got buffed in 11.15, where the boarding party bonus got increased both for your own resistances by about 15 at max level, and to the minions by about another, 35, 50, hang on, 45 resistances, up from like 135 to 180 at max level. And you got an extra, and then also in 1.17, you literally got an extra 100 health. It went from 300 to 400 extra health. Like it has received some pretty serious buffs to the utility of this item over its lifetime. Like, this item got buffed.
It really is the new iteration of Banner of Command, thinking about it. I mean, the Ardent Sensor thing is more of like how people didn't realize it was OP until it was overbuffed. Vladimir was a similar thing in Season 5-6, and then once it got nerfed so many times, people still knew how to play it and how to play it in the team fight, so they got used to it at that point, so they kept doing it. Hullbreaker is probably going to be around for a while now if we've seen the history of that. So let's cap off that topic there. I think there's a lot of follow-on effects we can do. I think there's so many minutiae which works for our veteran players. And then basically it's kind of like we saw a similar thing very recently with top laners taking Ignite too, where it's just like if you don't take the Ignite, you just lose lane. You have to take it in response. Change the way the game's played, unless you have a very concerted way to shut down that kind of game. Okay, so we are going on to our last like major bullet point. So while this is happening, if you have any questions for us, because we'll have some time for that today. Either message in chat, of course, if you're an audio listener or someone listening to this in the future or whatever. I'm sorry if you're lost, but at least you get to participate by listening along now, and maybe you can prepare for the next one. Message your questions in chat, or you can use the hashtag LJL podcast. We will check at some point when I have trust my internet.
I've got the questions,
do that.
Mate.
Or if you're part of the LJL Discord, which is linked below the stream, you can ask in the appropriate podcast question document there. So think about that now. So let's go on to our last topic, which is a bit more of an overall thing, kind of taking a step back and looking at the region. The LJL did great last year internationally. No question about that. It was a great year for us. Very special moment for DFM fans and LJL fans alike. How are we feeling about the overall level of our region right now? We don't have a DFM Exodia. We have good teams. We weren't necessarily... I wasn't feeling necessarily great about the LJL's level of power coming into this split comparative to that. I feel like we might just be another minor region. What's the feeling on the LJL as a region? Give it to me, Melvinizzle. How are you feeling 2 days in? Early overreactions. Let's go.
I'm feeling confident, actually. Like, not cocky, but I'm actually feeling okay, because coming into the end of the last split, when I was looking at it from a top down, I was like, okay, while I don't think Axis could have got done what the EFM did at Worlds, I think they could have had a pretty damn good showing. And now there's a couple teams here. We've got the Hawks, we've got the FM again, Rascal Jester. Depending on how it goes, maybe you could throw Sengoku and Axis in there if they keep consistency and get it better for Sengoku, at least by the end of the split. Maybe if I stop rooting for them, they'll, go up through the roof. But at the end of the day,
things we must give up for them to succeed.
Oh, I know. We've got to make some sacrifices, but if it gets the job done, and I think that means we've got enough teams that we can start a mini snowball effect here where they do gradually improve together. Because the most important part for me is we do have triple round robin. And because, I'm going to bring it back to again, because we have the gaps in between the game days, teams not only have the opportunity to be smarter with draft, there's also the necessity to be smarter with draft. Because now you do not get to go, oh, God, our strategy completely whiffed on Saturday, let's say. So
and we're playing next. What do we do?
Yeah, exactly. That was even worse for LJ, and now that you say it, because it was all the games in one day. It was like, oh, wow, I lost game one. Guess 3 games from now, my strategy is
one game after the other.
So, now you get to practice all the aspects of the game. So I think that generally we should be coming out at a pretty strong spot by the end of the split. Will we be at that same peak as the DFM super team? I would say highly unlikely, but I think we could still risk being a threat to a lot of teams by the time it comes to Worlds. We could potentially put up another showing at MSI. Sure. I'm actually still quietly confident.
Okay, Sam, what's your take?
So I kind of agree with Melvin's. I think that the absolute pinnacle is probably slightly lower, as we said, because Aria was really phenomenal. And it's sad to lose. Gang was really phenomenal. They are, I think, fair to say, the best 2 players in the region that have left in a lot of ways. I mean, you could probably put maybe Ebby up there as well. But the point is, that is 2 of the best 3 players in the region, with some arguments, of course, leaving. That's always pretty sad. And that's always, particularly when they were on one team that clicked so well, losing them is rough. That said, I actually think that considering that, a lot of the unknowns who have come in to replace or start in the LJL have largely been hits over misses, actually. I'm looking at Burning Core, I'm going, Dyson, flawless.
Fujimoto as well.
Fujimoto, great stuff. That's good. Yuhi seems to be playing actually okay at the minute. I'm looking over at people like V3 and I'm going, not super bad. I mean, needs some work, but not super bad. I'm looking at Sengoku and going, Jet, pretty good. Wants playing okay as well. You're going around Sangchu for Axis in general, Sangchu and Swamp. That's good work for these guys. And that's the kind of thing, I mean, where I've gone, a lot of these players we brought in who we didn't necessarily have expectations for because we didn't know what to expect of them, have actually turned up, at least in the first week, pretty okay. And that is good news, because it's one of those ones that they could come in and just be bad. Like, we've had that before. We've had that. We like a 50-50 success rate. I think it's over that this year, which is good news for the overall level, because I think, like, particularly AD carries right now, like, holy moly, everybody seems to be playing pretty well, it feels.
And that's when we've lost. I mean, hell, remember how many people we lost in 2021? We lost Archer, we lost Arts. Now we've lost Gango as well. This year, Feat.Nymaera. We've lost a hell of a lot of good ADCs, and we still got to. We might have the best ADC pool out of the minor regions. I feel like
it's very strong.
Normally when I say that kind of thing, I have to, because I don't really count PCS, VCS, although I kind of half count VCS it because they haven't been international for so long. But like VCS, the one role I'd be like, yeah, whatever. Is there 80 carries? Their 80 carries are sometimes, or like, because Artemis is really good. He was actually the second highest DPM player after Honey in terms of all world's qualifying region players. He was just below us, but outside of that, I'm not always convinced with. I'm not always convinced with VCS 80 carries. I think that the support
fun but not consistent.
I think that they've got some really really good junglers, some really really good top laners, one or two really good mids, and like I feel like sometimes their 80 carries are like a bit of the weak spot compared to international stuff. And I look at the LJL, I'm like, yeah, we've got that really damn pat.
They all stand up. Yeah, exactly.
And actually, a lot of them are native, and obviously a lot of them are native too. And we have to argue that for a couple of the other roles, as much as like. All of our roles, I think there's a Japanese player in the top two. Or in the case of the supports, actually, probably most of the... Well, I mean, they're all really damn good as well. So, yeah, okay. I'll give my quick thoughts on level of power then. One thing which I thought actually in... Okay, I'm going to story time them, because, you're talking about how, you can't trust CGA. Maybe Sengoku will succeed when I stop supporting them. I've seen you and young Middlecott supporting your teams, and I'll have you know I supported both those bloody teams in 2020, and they both hurt me a lot. Spring 2020, Sengoku came in, they won the Juggernaut match, and then 3 patches changed between that and the semi-finals. DFM adapt to the change, and they just slammed through the rest of the bracket. Summer 2020, the less said about CJ falling off a cliff, the better. But what we did have, particularly in spring 2020, was we had a really solid top 3. We had DFM, we had Sengoku, and we had Rascal Jester, who were actually all really good at that point, because that was the Ninja, Art, Vivid, Rascal Jester, Cog, and Hatchemetch were the top side as well. Really good team thinking back to it, actually. That is my big LJL what if. And then that changed. COVID hit. Weird stuff happened. Luckily, we got V3 out of that mess too. But I feel like we haven't had like a solid top core that actually pushed each other and stayed together for a while. Now, I would be really interested in seeing how many of these teams have multi-year plans, because I don't know if it will hit this year. We're doing better than I thought coming into this, but it's still not there for like MSI hopes and dreams just yet. But the question is this going to be something where we have these top teams staying together next year as well? If that's the case, I'm actually really happy with how the LJL is doing, as long as we don't expect results this year. Look towards next year and see if these teams stick together and push each other forwards. That's the big thing for me. So
overall level up, top peak, probably a little bit down.
Okay, so with that in mind, we are currently on 12.2, going on to 12.3. Let's quickly have a think about how that might affect our teams, because we've talked about, obviously Axe is coming with some very solid ideas and stuff. Now, I'd love to see teams picking up Ari in 12.3. Not sure that's going to happen as much as I think she's the best mid on the patch. What are your thoughts on 12.3, Melvinizzle?
I hate to say it, because I just had a mini revelation after the conspiracy board, but for top lane, a lot of the items actually, the bruiser items got hit in one way or another to shift them away from health and towards AD and bruisery actual stats like that. Something comes up, Hullbreaker, pretty good for the efficiency even without, and the HP on it. I think that Hullbreaker will continue to show its light and will actually become really scary on a lot of champions who could synergize with these, like Blade the Ruin King, etc., getting a massive boost, just going up a flat 2% max health damage for only 100 more gold. If you're combining that with a super efficient, cheap 2,800 gold hull-breaking item, then suddenly you've got a really dirty 2-item spike for split pushing. So I think that we are only...
Are we going to see Hullbreaker Aurelia?
We could. We genuinely could, because I think that my big thing about Hullbreaker is...
Because every time Blade is strong, every time Blade is strong, Aurelia is strong. Like, that's all I'm thinking.
That's really true. And Dash is great at that, for example. Like, I'd definitely see that happening.
Ooh. I don't know how I feel about
I'll also add that obviously there's a couple things like, because we haven't seen much of LJL, it's a little bit difficult to see how much is going to change. Because I'm not quite sure when we do switch, whether it will be next. Oh, are we switching next?
Should be next week.
Or should be switching next week. Okay. So in that case, the point is like we haven't really had time to settle into a Corki meta because we haven't had a meta yet, right? So in some ways, I feel that 12.3 will be our first look in some ways at the LJL, and obviously Corki going down is a big one globally.
That actually, ironically, might help the LJL because obviously. So I see there's a question later about various regions, and Hina, that's a very nasty question. We'll get to that. But the NLC had a real problem with just randomly picking Corki and just crutching on it. And we're not ready to get rid of the Corki crutches yet. We're still propped up on them just a little bit. Some of the teams are. The LJL doesn't need them. We haven't had Corki meta, so actually we're going to adapt to the demise of Corki a lot better, actually, in some ways, ironically.
One would imagine. Like, I'll add in the like. Yeah, I agree. I think if there's anything else that's kind of like popping out to me, I would be interested to see whether someone like NT picks up the Nami, because obviously he's with Honey, who would absolutely pick something like Illusion. And with Nami getting some pretty big buffs, there's a world where we get some of those, especially because Caitlyn's gone down this patch. Yeah. Another lane dominant bot lane, which we saw like tear up last Worlds, would be something like the Lucian, which I think would be really good fun. And, there's also a couple junglers around, like, Lilia got a little bit of a buff. I know Steel did like that champion. So well, maybe so that comes up.
Weird. She's
because like Lilting Lullaby being stronger early is a big deal for that champion. So there's a world where you might see
She's also not very good into stuff like Victor still, because he just one-shots.
Yeah, I mean, like...
Okay, so I have a question.
We talked about the Bruise Rising changes. The only other one, sorry, before you go, Melvin, the only other one to say is TF getting nerfed is a relatively big deal for some of our mid laners, because they did love that champion.
Yeah, absolutely true. I think that TF just losing a lot of his early power with that nerf to his stack deck, losing a lot of the early attack speed, hurts him a lot.
7% drop in challenge.
Not being able to... That's disgusting. I hadn't heard that metric, but it makes complete sense, right? Twisted Fate wants to get prio mid on the side lane. If he can't do the first part, the second part is going to be so much more heavily punished. Now... I'm seeing that Quinn is getting a pretty notable series of buffs on this patch. And I know that you've been a bit of a Quinn enjoyer, my friend there, Nymaera, and I want to know, is there anybody in the LJL that is historically a Quinn player? Specifically any, people that might be suited towards a Hullbreaker as well, because I could only wait until this starts to become the thing. No Quinns?
Okay, so I've never even thought about Hullbreaker Quinn. So the only Quinn I remember was Urnyan on Axis 2020. Obviously, he's not in the league anymore.
Yeah, okay.
He beat CGA doing that in summer 2020, which was a really sad game. That was where I started to realize that Arya was really elo held on Zoe, because he'd have great games. He actually didn't die that game, went to like 6-0-4 or something, and fucking lost, because his team would just always overextend into Quinn TF. That was Gaudiadu's Axis as well, actually. That was fun. I can't think of many...
I'm looking through all the stats here. No, Ebby hasn't played it. Rayfarki hasn't played it. The one person I would have said, they'd be a Quinn player would have been Cog, because he did Tristana top and the rest of it.
Also, no one really played. No one really played ranged top lane as top lane either, unless you're a Dasher. So, ironically, might actually do better mid lane than to do top lane.
Maybe
get Dasher playing it again. I will say that so when I've played Quinn, and I played up to like high diamond level, which is not the same as pro. It's not, but it's like I always like the matchup into Tryndamere, particularly when you could W max go phase rush and take exhaust, and just Tryndamere could not do anything ever. Now I don't know how that works into. I mean, if you go like Gale Force or Kraken Slayer into Lord Doms, you can probably kill him through Hullbreaker, thinking about it. Because you just got a lot of really good, consistent damage at that point. I don't know if people are actually going to be practiced enough at the pick, though. So
no, it's something to see maybe later on in the split. Might be what
I love the pick.
Shows up.
So
I love the pick. I don't know if I'm going to see it.
I've looked through pretty much all of the long-time active members, or long-time active top laners in the league. None of them have Quinn in their match history across any season right now. So Nat,
we can hope this will be the time.
Ebby, Rayfarki, none of them have it in their history.
Actually,
they've got a lot of other random stuff. They don't have that.
So Hina quickly chimed in chat and said that Yellow Yoshi could probably pick it up. He plays a lot of stuff in solo queue. We'll wait for it, and that seems like Axis.
That would be a fun one.
Axis would be a good team for it.
Be very different to start playing.
Okay,
yeah.
we could wonder about the meta for a while. So I think we've covered a lot of the good stuff. So with that in mind, I think it's time for us to go on to the questions that we've been asked. First one is, since I haven't been able to watch all the games in depth from Chimo, is Burning Core winning with or despite Yuhi? I will start this off. I feel like it's actually not either. It's in between. He's
been okay.
Okay, relatively quiet, but quiet for Yuhi means that he's not like getting absolutely dumped on, which is a somewhat of a bonus.
Yeah, I feel like Yuhi still hasn't done anything to impress. I got baited by Yuhi at the start of last split when I joined the league, where he looked really good for one game and then proceeded to do absolutely negative gaming for the rest of the split. So don't get excited. Do not get excited. I want to see him be quiet and consistent for at least 3 weeks. That is the timer I'm putting on Yuhi, and if he is quiet and consistent for 3 weeks, Burning Core genuinely a team that we might actually have to start talking about. But until then, I'll say it in spite of.
Yeah. I'll add this in here. That Yuhi, one of my flaws with him was his ability to lose every lane he was in, no matter what was happening. Like, bad. He's actually the 3rd highest AD carry after a couple games in terms of his goal difference and CF difference at 15. Like, he's ahead of Utapon right now.
2 games, and Yuhi. I mean, so DFM have played against Sengoku, against Rascal Jesters, 2 of our top teams, who have the best AD carries from last season on them. So
exactly.
Whereas Burning Core have played against V3 and CGA, 2 of our least impressive teams.
Exactly, and I can agree with that, and that's the reason I'm not saying a huge man here. But what I will also say is that Yuhi used to be the worst AD carry in the league. Was last year pretty hands down, I think, and he would be down CS to pretty much everybody, no matter how good they were. That is a good sign, at least, that he's at least holding his own right now. Even if I do think that a lot of their win condition has largely been, Fujimoto being good and then the top side of the map being very dominant. Right?
Okay, all right. Any last thoughts on that question?
Nope.
Okay, right. I'm G, our famous video editor who made a really good initial D reference in a Zeri clip, which you should go watch on our Twitter, asks, I will do you one better. Is Yuhi winning with or despite Yuhi?
What?
Yuhi.
What?
I mean, is Yuhi winning with Yuhi or despite Yuhi? I mean,
so basically,
I still feel it boils down to the same answer. It is
no. What this is you know that old like saying says there are 2 wolves inside you that are fighting off, and the one that wins and the one that feeds. And I don't mean actually like feeding in there. Actually, I think Yuhi has not been feeding so much right now. So
Chat, I know it's Valentine's Day. I know it's the day after Valentine's Day, but there are 2 Yuhis inside of you, so enjoy that however you will.
Oh no.
We're having a nice normal podcast. It was a good day. Like,
it was going well.
Sorry,
don't get me wrong. He's got some stylish hair there, but that wasn't really a consideration of mine. Anyway, point being, I think Yuhi has probably been winning with Yuhi so far, but remember, this is the kind of thing where you have to keep feeding one of those wolves. So we could change partway through and start, feeling sorry for the inting Yuhi, and then feed that one instead, and we end up with a rehash of last year. Difficult to break old habits.
Okay, and then we come down to the last question, which is solely pointed at me. Thank you, Hina. Because Hina's asked, question to Nymaera, which is the most fun region to cast? Because I've been on a lot of random shit recently. He is juggling. So I'm going to completely dodge the question.
Alex,
yes.
What region has been your favorite to cast right now?
I think they're all my favorite in their own different ways.
Can we have message Quickshot and say that?
I think they're my.
Do you want to message Kai, Boss Venelsi? So you're saying.
Do you want me to message me about the LJL?
Yeah, message yourself. Talk to yourself.
I'm gonna message Aria and be like, "Hey, now that you're gone, the LJL's
now that I don't love this region as much anymore." See how it is.
So what I will say about so let's start with the LJL. I think that the LJL is the special thing about casting the LJL, and I think that everyone will agree with this on the team, is that when you cast to a very dedicated niche audience, you get away with so much stuff because they're kind of along with you for the ride. You don't have to convince a lot of neutral viewers every cast. They're kind of there with you. I wouldn't have been able to do the infamous Burning Core Sengoku game if it hadn't been for how you guys in chat act, actually. Because, you know the narratives, you know the in-jokes, you know what we're like. We kind of get to do that. I love that about the LJL. It feels very comfortable. It feels like home. And it's also remote, and I've been doing it for so long. It's just very, very comfortable for me. And I know I also know the story so in depth that I get to pull out weird stuff at really cool times as well. So I've really enjoyed the LJL for that reason. It's always going to have a special part in my heart. Sam, what are you going to say?
I'm just
I heard
saying that was a very eloquent politician's answer. Sidestepped eloquently. I'll give you that.
Okay, and then with the NLC, so what I will say about the NLC is that because for the LEC production, we're all COVID bubbled effectively. So when I was casting with Quickshot, I was only allowed to stay in a room with Quickshot, no one else. And we couldn't even be in the same dressing room at the same time and stuff like that. It's very, very tight because they take their COVID situation very, very seriously. Absolutely understandable. It does take away from a lot of the atmosphere. I'd love to be mingling with the other casters and kind of soaking up that knowledge and experience and all this other stuff and just getting to know them because they're great people, right? But the thing about the NLC is that because we're all in the same bubble for show days and stuff, we have a great atmosphere. Everyone in the NLC team is really lovely. We get a lot of free reign with what we do in pre-show and stuff like that because it's slightly less structured, more about us as personalities. So I really love the NLC and the freedom that we get and the atmosphere we have in the team. And then the LEC is just it's like hallowed ground, right? The LEC is like hallowed ground, and being able to work with these just absolute titans of the industry and soak in what they're doing, have the top of the range production stuff, have all of the bells and whistles you want for a production, and also have that ability to show yourself to the world at large. Because at the end of the day, most people who have seen me casting now know nothing about everything else I've cast because they will have just seen me in LEC. It's really strange having that first time to debut as well. So there are reasons for me to enjoy and love the casts on each of these. Obviously, this last weekend casting LEC this is one thing which I'm going to remember for the rest of my life because of all the special stuff which went on, the great games and the way that Quickshot was to work with as well. And of course, the weekend before that, working with Verdius and Dracos was special in its own ways. Alongside that, each of them are really, really cool, and I wouldn't choose. I physically couldn't really choose either of them for lots of the reasons. Obviously, I want to be on bigger and bigger stages. But if it was like a viewership, if you just take viewership out of the equation and the community around it, all of them have great things to kind of go towards on that. So politician answer over. That's what I've got.
Look at this with this sappy answer, honestly. Where's your hard edge?
Almost like I'm really passionate about everything that I cast.
It's true. You are literally golden retriever.
Yeah. And another thing which I will say about the LJL as well is we get to support so many people in developing talent, and also just I feel like we've become a real talent factory. And there's this guy called Melvinizzle who's done really good work for us. I feel like we've really
Where's that? Here he was a guest on the NLC.
God damn. Okay. Yeah, I think that's
co-caster.
Oh well, he's not so bad. I agree.
Okay. With that, I think it's probably time we started wrapping stuff up now. And I know I went on a bit of monologue there, and we probably should have opened it up in a more way.
Yeah, let us talk. Who do you think you are?
Okay, with that, if you have any last takes on this week's games, now's the time to say it. And also, if you want to plug anything you've been doing or will be doing in the next week or however long, Initialise, what are you up to in the next however long? And any of the takes?
I will be doing lots of admin and doing some writing and continuing to be awesome. That's what I should be doing, which you can follow over at my Twitter, which you'll find in the show notes below my face if you're watching live, or at Initialise if you want to listen, where the L is in fact a 1 because someone already has just regular Initialise. So I have to be edgy and have numbers in my name.
Yeah. Okay, and Melvinizzle, how about you? You got anything you want to shout out?
For myself, not so much coming up this week. Just trying to work out work-life balance kind of thing at the moment. Funnily enough, a 9 till 5 in casting is a lot to juggle. So
all about fun.
It's been fun. Got plenty of days prep. I'm on Newell tomorrow, actually. I don't know if I was meant to say that or not, but I just did whoopsie daisy. If not, so gonna be kicking off the streams for that again. Very exciting.
Well, we first met at Newell as well.
We did. That was the first time we worked together, and it has led to a beautiful casting friendship.
It's been good, yeah. And because the thing with something like Newell is You can be there. It's like, oh, I'm turning up every other week. It's kind of hard to commit to this, and then like, because you know you're like pseudo competing for the finals and stuff. I was sat there like, oh shit, this guy's really good. I better take this really seriously. This split.
Yeah, so I definitely got.
I consider Melvinizzle part of the driving force for me. Yeah, with something like that, because it's like friendly competition, like you can really drive each other forward. And that was one of the things I was like, I should really start taking this more seriously. That's one of my enduring memories of that time. That's crazy because this guy is crazy. He's very good at what he does. So yeah, I mean, so Neil, anything else besides Neil that you've got going on the next couple of weeks, or
that I am allowed to talk about? No. Ominous, yes.
Well, watch out for the things that you can't talk about then.
Exactly. Cool. So I guess that means in that case, follow me on Twitter. It's the name underneath me if you're on video, Melvinizzle lol. Because Melvinizzle was also taken for some reason. Not I don't know. I feel like Initialise is a cool name.
On Lost Ark, someone has taken my name, so I'm now Feat.Nymaera instead of Nymaera. And all of my names are now just.
I just gave my character an actual name, so
all of my character names are now just going to be like various. So I'm going to have Feat.Nymaera, Nymeara,
the error of name.
Oh, it gets cursed at every turn.
And then Feat.Nymaera, Nymeara, and Nymeara. So I'm going to have
XD at the end with an
and I'll have another, and I'll have each of those with an XD at the end, just so I can cover all the classes. So there you go.
Have you got like a lot of really ratty old, like hot pink and black checkered jackets where you've like drilled a hole in the sleeve so you can put your thumb through it, and a studded belt with like a few of the studs missing, and My Chemical Romance blasting out.
Okay. I'm not very hip, so I was a ways away for a minute.
I'm not sure that's really considered hip anymore, by the way.
I'm not hip in any generation.
Okay, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go hip hop scotch over to raiding someone, because that's the end of the podcast episode. Thank you very much for joining me.
Lexi.
And thank you for listening along in chat and elsewhere. And of course, if you're watching this from the future, thank you very much for supporting our content. Leave a like, a comment, subscribe, and everything else in terms of rating and supporting us. Follow us on Twitter, join our Discord, all of the other stuff. And we will see you next week for another episode. Goodbye for now.